Hello, everyone. Kelly Deutsch here, and today I have joining me Luke Healy. Luke is the co-founder of the Integral Christian Network, where they do a lot of really interesting things, and I'm excited to talk to him. It has a lot to do with things like Teilhard de Chardin and spiral dynamics, and some of those things that I think a lot of us find a little baffling and inaccessible. So I'm excited to pick Luke's brain today about what this means, what it has to do with the contemplative life and mysticism and growing in each of our journeys. So Luke, I'm excited to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kelly. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Let me start our conversation just by asking, how did you first come across this world of integral Christianity, and how is it different? What makes it distinct?
Yeah, I came across it in a few different ways. One of which primarily is through Richard Rohr, who's a big proponent of integral theory and integral Christianity. Also exposure to spiral dynamics through the liturgists, and kind of just started the rabbit trail there, learning about this sort of way of seeing the world, of understanding this field that can be a little esoteric, like you said, a little confusing. There's a lot to it. So yeah, happy to be able to talk about it and dive into it a little bit.
Yeah. So, how, for the person who's never heard of integral Christianity or of spiral dynamics or any of these folks, how would you explain that to just a layperson on the street?
Yeah, definitely. I think a good way to maybe initially start or open the doors is it's really kind of two things about it, at least in the way that I understand it. One is that it's evolutionary. So we are looking at faith and spirituality, and really integral encompasses more than that, but our focus is in that area, not just looking back, but how are we going forward? And one of the things, few of the things that Jesus said is, I have much more to teach you, but you're not ready for it yet. Or, Jesus said, we will do greater things, or that, it's good for me to leave so the Spirit can come. So what is this sort of forward movement? What does faith look like now and going forward into the future? So much of religion and spirituality can get caught in looking back and studying and learning about the past, and what was it like in Jesus' times, and finding documents, and all that stuff's good and important too, right? But I think the goal and the focus is to bring it to the now, and where are things going forward here? How is life evolving? How is spirituality evolving? How is consciousness evolving? And that's what integral theory kind of really speaks to and maps that out in a lot of different ways. And then along with being evolutionary, it's also integrative. So we're not just like, oh, let's leave all that behind, right? The past is the past. Let's charge forward ahead. We really want to own the best of what's come before. Living in an integrated consciousness with these sort of previous or past structures of consciousness, these ways of being, these practices, all these things that we've learned, that is the beauty and goodness of tradition. And then integrating also wisdom from other traditions, and not just spirituality and religion, but from science, from systems theories, from health, from really everything, right? That the more that we can integrate and bring into our worldview, to our consciousness, to our way of being, the more complete that we'll be, the more holistic we'll be. So crucially, we're also integrating all of our ways of being and knowing. So not just in our mind, but really in our body and in those other structures of consciousness. So that's getting more into some of the consciousness stuff. But that's maybe a good initial point, right? It's evolutionary, and it's also integrative.
Yeah. So the transcend and include.
Yeah, to some extent. We could talk about that a little bit more too. The transcend and include can also get us maybe a little bit too much into a linear projection, which is also, I think, some of the reasons some people have some dissonance with spiral dynamics or with integral theory. And that's why the integrative part is so important, because we're not saying, well, those indigenous people back then, they were naive and they didn't have, right, the knowledge that we have today. They didn't know about the universe, and so, right. So we need to transcend that, and we'll include some of the things, right, as sort of a token gesture. But actually, an integrative integral theory really does more than include. It actually embodies and presentiates or brings forth those ways of knowing, those ways of being in ourselves. So we're actually bringing them, those latent ways of knowing and being that are within all of us. We're bringing them to bear again in our in our life and in our ways of being. So.
Can you give me an example of that?
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things as we seek to kind of move into this more embodied holistic consciousness is to recognize that we all have a magical structure of consciousness within us, this way of knowing and being that's a little more enchanted, right? And especially in Western culture, where we're so in our heads, and we have all these ways of knowing and learning, and we study and we get it all, and it's all up here, right? And maybe some spirituality we bring in the heart, right? We want to be loving, we incorporate that, but a lot of it's kind of that heart up. But actually deeper down in our innermost being, or our womb, as Jesus called it when he said, from your wombs will flow rivers of living water, is the depths, the ground of our being, what we call our spiritual womb. And in that space, in that deep intuitive place of wisdom and unity and wholeness, is another way of being, is another reality that we can learn to sort of tap into and intuit and live from a little bit more. So one example of that is intuition, right? The more that we kind of get in tune with that, the more that we start to know things that we didn't learn about, right? We didn't study, and then we're getting into some intuition and how people feel about that. But that's one way that those things are actually deep within us, that way of knowing, that way of being, intuition being one example, that the more we kind of embody and practice into, the more that becomes a felt reality in how we think, or how we know, right? That's not just up here. But is more embodied within us.
Can you tell me like a story, either from your life or from someone who has discovered integral Christianity, and what changed? Like what difference does it make to think about that form of, I don't know, what would you say instead of transcend and include, just embodying and in a holistic way, all that you find to be good, true, and beautiful?
Yeah, I mean, integrating, it's so transformative. It's so healing, really, actually. A lot of people come into integral theory through the maps and through the understanding of, oh, here's how we can kind of get the lay of the land and understand kind of where we've been and where we're going. And that's great. And we kind of understand it on a cognitive level, and it helps us see things outside of sort of the flatland of the polarizing duality of everything is conservative or progressive, or everything is, old or new, or we get into those dualisms. And I think that's part of the contemplative path, right? Where we're trying to sort of move beyond that dualistic way of being into more of a non-dual space. But in through that, it's not just how we learn about that and know that, but how do we really embody it and engage in it? And so, I mean, I hear stories all the time of people who join our WeSpace groups, and this way of being is so healing, and it's holistic, and it's integrated, because we can get so easily trapped in that mental space, that place where we're just trying to know more and more and more, and it actually becomes imperialistic, where our mind is controlling us. We're driven by needing to know more and learn and learn and learn. I know that's part of my own journey. I just read hundreds and hundreds of books trying to find the answer, right? Trying to learn more, to know, and really finally coming to the end of my mind and realizing that I'd have to go deeper, and I'd have to also move out into the relational space. I couldn't do it all on my own individualistically, but that it had to be with others and through others. So, I mean, yeah, there's so many stories of people who've joined our groups and have come into this different way of sort of practicing a spirituality that is more embodied, that's more relational, and that it's more co-creative, because we're drawing on those inner resources and discovering new ways that we can transform the way that we're living and loving and being in the world.
How did that shift happen for you? I mean, am I remembering correctly? Are you a 5?
Yeah. Enneagram 5, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, so just naturally oriented towards more heady existence in the world. So how did that transition happen for you, and what did that look and feel like? And I mean, did others notice that transition happening in you?
Yeah, that's a great question, and a long story. I'll try to keep it somewhat short. But I, in my early years, had a early childhood trauma that led me. My coping strategy was to retreat to my head. So that's kind of how I moved into the 5 space. I thought, oh, if I just figured everything out and didn't make any mistakes, I wouldn't get attacked, or I couldn't feel any more pain, and I'd be safe. So that was the initial part. And then through my faith journey, I knew that I needed to move back into my heart, to rediscover my emotions, to reconnect to that space in me. And I did that in my 20s. And through that, of course, being a 5, I was still in my head. I was reading, I was studying, I was following the footnotes, because I was also kind of dissatisfied with the state of affairs of religion and much of institutional Christianity as I had experienced it and as I'd grown up in. So I was reading the mystics and reading just all these different places that no one told me about, that no one recommended in those days, especially not in my evangelical camps. And I'd followed those footnotes and found more mystics, and really moved into that experiential, to say, oh, there's this divine immediacy, there's this presence here that went beyond learning about concepts, that went beyond just knowing more and more. And as I read, eventually got to a point where I realized that I'm not gonna find this in a book. There's a beautiful story that I really love that is from the Sufi poet Rumi, and some people may be familiar with Shams, who was Rumi's dear beloved and confidant and teacher. When they first met, Rumi was around a well with a number of his students, and Shams just kind of strolled into the middle of the gathering, walked up to the well and pushed the stack of books down into the well. And no one knew who this guy was. And everyone the students all freaked out. And Rumi looked at him and he said, "You've lived too long on borrowed awareness." And that was the catalyst for Rumi's transformation and awakening. So when I read that story, that really struck me as well. I realized that I was trying to find borrowed awareness in my mind, and I needed to own my own awareness. I needed to deepen into that mystical way of being and knowing and living within myself. But again, not just within myself, also with others. I had a pretty clear message from God that said, you can't go any further alone. And so that was a movement into the relational space, into seeking. I've always sought community, but finding deeper mystical community. So.
Yeah. So how did you go about finding that mystical community?
Yeah, well, I tried different things throughout the years, and kind of corresponding to that inward journey, I first thought, well, if we just change the way we're doing things, right? Church isn't great. Institutional religion, well, let's change the forms, right? Let's get a new system in here. Let's rearrange things, and that will fix it. That will get community how it's supposed to be, right? So I dabbled in the house church movement and missional church and some of the sort of post-evangelical things of the 90s and early 2000s, and eventually got into starting a new monastic intentional community, which was, really kind of trying to go back to the roots of early Christianity, living in common, sharing everything, moving to the deserted places of the empire, and doing life together. And that was good. It was also a very spiritually ego boosting. We're doing it the right way. We're doing the way it should be. And that led me into a dark night, into a period of a death of my spiritual ego and a loss of trying to create the beloved community, to create the way things should be from my own space of, oh, this is what it looks like. This is how we do it. Let's reorganize in this way. And yeah, that was about 8 years in that space. And in this sort of reawakening, rediscovering, when I came out of that process, I thought, well, okay, where do I find people? Where are the others? And so it was kind of finding the maps, right? Finding the conceptual frameworks. This new integral seemed to point to something that recognized some deeper realities, that recognized some ways of seeing the world that resonated with where I was and felt like God was evolving me into. So I found Paul Smith, who wrote the book Integral Christianity, looked him up on a website, found out he actually was a pastor of a church for 49 years in the town that I grew up in, but I wasn't ready to meet him yet. So it was after all of this journey for myself that I met him, and we just connected instantly, had this mystical resonance, and are really spiritual soulmates. And from there, actually at our first meeting, he said it can be kind of lonely in this space. And I said, yeah, well, what if it doesn't have to be? So that's one of my gathering. I've always been a gathering. That's one of my archetypes. And so we have this great tool of the internet and ways of finding people out there who share similar resonances and ways of seeking to be mystics and live together in unique ways. So, well, not live together, but connect in this way now. So that's kind of how that started. That's how Integral Christian Network started, was to sort of gather together some of this evolutionary and integrative approach to Christianity.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot in your story that I resonate with, and I think a lot of people listening will resonate with, that dissatisfaction or something was amiss in the way that we were experiencing religion, spirituality, whatever it was, thinking that we were then doing it the right way, and which is interesting because I think a lot of people will swing more progressive and be like, now I'm doing it right, And it's funny because I think we can be just as fundamentalists, whether we're conservative, or we can become fundamentalist liberals. We can be fundamentalist contemplatives, are you doing your 20-minute sit every day? Oh, you're not, huh? Whatever.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you're open to sharing, how did what popped the bubble as far as, spiritual ego? I mean, I did the same thing, and it took my life falling apart to actually realize how much I relied on all of the structures. Look, I'm a nun. I'm praying 4 hours a day. I'm having cool archbishops and people from the Vatican over for dinner. And we're talking with all the cool people in the in crowd. And it took all of that being stripped away for me to realize how much I depended on those things and praying for 4 hours a day and being this joyful servant to make me feel like I was a good person. I'm curious how that happened for you, however much you're open to sharing.
Yeah, of course. No, I was in the new monastic community, and we were living in a very underserved community, very violent, very very difficult neighborhood, a difficult circumstance. We were living in the upstairs of this big old stone church building, and 10 of us living with one bathroom, and married couples and singles, and it was a thing. But we were doing what we were supposed to. We're urban farming. We're kind of getting into this new way of it all, and underneath that, it was like, it's shadow. We don't see it when we're in the midst of it, right? It's not present and conscious to us, but it's this underlying drive to find value, to find meaning and worth, and really to maybe to be considered worthy of love, or to be thinking that we're serving God in the way that we need to, that's what God demands or requires of us. I think for myself, it was sort of an idealistic passion. I always felt like in my life, and that's one of the great gifts that traditional Christianity and religion, I think, gave to me, and that's part of the healthy integrating and including, is to recognize and say, there's a real devotion and passion that came with my upbringing in evangelical Christianity, for all of its many flaws and faults. It left me no illusion about what life is and what life isn't. And so I may have really, dove into the spiritual ego thing, but at least I didn't climb the corporate ladder and do the career thing. And that can be great and fine and whatever. I'm not trying to be idealistic about that either. But it charged me with this sense of, I'm not here just to make money. I'm not here on this earth just to, exist and be present, right? I think Teilhard de Chardin says it's always better to be more conscious than less. And so in those early forms, it wasn't very conscious, but it did have that passion that I remember praying as a teenager, okay, God, whatever it takes. And being also somewhat aware that I have no idea how God's going to hear this prayer, and it's beyond what I can know, right? There's this,
Yeah, I was gonna say that's
this
a dangerous prayer.
evolutionary, it's a very dangerous prayer, right? Yeah, this evolutionary God beyond God, right? I don't even know what what that's going to be. It's going to be the breakdown of my whole faith system and way of seeing and understanding myself.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it just through that passion, I mean, I was so committed to that community, thinking that we were I was finally living the way that we were meant to live. I would have left. I was so loyal and committed, and God basically had to say, your time here is done. Like like, I mean, it was a pressure cooker. It puts you in an environment where you're forced to face your shadow a lot more than you would if you're just kind of living alone, or even with family.
Amen.
So yeah, I mean, it was sort of both a gradual unfolding through conflict. I mean, you're striving, you're trying to make it work, you're trying to be, and then all of a sudden it just kind of cracks open, right? It just kind of, whether it's through the falling apart or through, I mean, in this case, our community, we bought an old school bus, a mini school bus, painted it green, and drove across the country for a big fun trip, visiting national parks and things. And that was like the super intense pressure cooker that it kind of caused it all to explode and really see ourselves and face some of those harsh realities. Of course, it took years for me to kind of process and unfold all of that after leaving the community, but
Yeah.
it was a blessing. I mean, it was a good thing to go through that and recognize, like, oh, this was just kind of a new fundamentalism, right? A little more progressive or enlightened, or but we had that superiority, and that's why I push back on the transcend and include language from earlier, because it so easily can get into that superiority, right? Oh, we're gonna transcend that lower stage, that way of being that is, well, we're much beyond that now, right? And that can creep into, actually more than creep in, that can be present in a lot of the integral world, because we're looking at development, we're looking at evolution, and we can think of that very linearly, especially if we're doing it primarily from our mental structure of consciousness. So
yeah, would you talk to me a little bit about that? Because I think anytime we have a spiritual measuring stick, it can be very easy to feel superior and almost disdain, if not your past self, other people who are in that, and like, oh, or even just pity them, like, oh, those poor people who are, way far back there. I mean, I see that with people who, I remember giving a talk once on mysticism to a church group, and a girl came up afterwards and she's like, so I've been reading Teresa's Interior Castle, and I think I'm in the 5th mansion, but it might be the 4th. How can I tell the difference? And I was like, I wonder if this is maybe even the right question to be asking. And I'm curious how you approach that in spiral dynamics and integral Christianity, because I think it's very easy to be like, well, this person's in teal, but I'm over here, Yeah, both how do you approach that, and maybe also talking through what are some of these levels, and is it even a question we should be asking what level we're in?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and it's kind of at the heart of integral theory or spiral dynamics. Or, so for those of you who aren't familiar with spiral dynamics, or part of integral theory is called growing up, which is this idea of stages of consciousness, at least in integral theory as it's expressed by Ken Wilber, who's kind of the main popularizer of it. And it's that we go through these stages of growth and evolution. We grow up from sort of a tribal, well, Paul Smith writes about this too, in kind of a warrior stage, and the tribal stage, and then a modern stage, a postmodern stage, and then an integral stage, right? So it's kind of this evolutionary movement. And in each of those stages, there are things that are healthy and there are things that are unhealthy. And then, we have to grow and transcend and include is kind of the common narrative there. And yeah, it can be helpful, right? It can be helpful, I think, as a good starting place, especially, there's a lot of nuance there. There's a lot of understanding in how we develop and grow as people. But it is helpful to see that it's not all just kind of this flat land, right? It's not all just that dualistic back and forth. It helps kind of make sense of, oh, well, there is sort of a path of movement here. there are stages of faith, right? There's ways that we grow and evolve. And yeah, the mind, the ego wants to put ourselves at the highest stage, right? Or maybe we'll have a little false humility and say, well, okay, I'm not quite up there to the ultraviolet place, but I'm definitely teal, right? I'm in the second tier, I'm not, or we just kind of just naturally recoil and reject against that hierarchical sort of understanding, which also makes sense. I can understand that too, because it can definitely come across that way in how it's presented a lot of times. Before Ken Wilber actually was. Integral theory's roots are from Sri Aurobindo in India with integral yoga, and also Jean Gebser, who was a Swiss German theologian, well, not theologian, a cultural phenomenologist and historian and poet. And he talks about structures of consciousness, not stages of consciousness. And I was kind of alluding to that earlier, that we have grown up through these ways of being and living and knowing as humanity, and over that time, it's not that we transcend and what we came from is gone, but that's still a part of us. It's still within us, and it becomes latent or overcome or shadowed, and really that's necessary, because those previous structures, they become deficient, right? We have efficient forms of them, and then they become deficient. And so we have to find a new way of being. And right now we're in the deficient mental. And I think that's really helpful and important to understand, because we need to discover new ways of being. And that isn't just a transcendent leap into what's next. Oh, and then we'll figure out what to include after that. No, it actually comes about through integrating all of those previous structures of consciousness in us, in embodied mystical access. In Christian language, we'd call it integrating our divine participation, our divine being. So that's a whole other thread. But yeah, so I think it is helpful to get a lay of the land, to get some maps, and none of them are perfect, right? None of them really explain everything, and all of them have lots of nuances that can easily get lost, just like the Enneagram, right? We can type ourselves and get into a thing, and I'm the no, now I understand it. But the true teachers of it, who get into the depth and wisdom of it, they'll say, well, okay, this is what it's actually trying to point us toward. It's not trying to get us to identify into our type more and say, oh, I'm a 5, and now here's a meme about how I am, right? But no, this is a way to understand ourselves, to see things more clearly, with more wisdom, and hopefully maybe provide some paths of growth and continual transformation. So
yeah, I like that, like a path of growth. And I also like just thinking of it as a structure of consciousness, like things are just shifting because something was not working as well. The deficiency that, like, okay, I've come to the end of what this can offer me. It seems, in some ways anyway, it's becoming deficient. And so I need something else, something new, something perhaps beyond what I've been living.
Yeah, well, Cynthia Bourgeault has been writing about this lately, and the metaphor she used was like rooms in a museum, right? You have these rooms of different eras and epochs of art creation, and each one has its value and its beauty and its goodness. And you spend a little time in this room, and then you say, oh, okay, things need to grow and evolve. There's new meaning that needs to come forth. There's new expressions and ways of grappling with the world and how we understand and how we become into reality. So I'm going to move into this room for a little bit. That room is still a part of the museum. We still have access to it. We draw on it. There's qualities. There's techniques. Right. We can overstretch the metaphor, but it's this sense of it all. It all belongs, and it's all a part of things, and it is embedded, and it informs our way of expression now.
Yeah, that's a nice way of thinking of it, because you can see how, let's say Renaissance art, was informed by classicalism back, kind of Greco-Roman, but also then how it would impact, the next people that would come after, the other movements in art, even if sometimes those movements were reactions to that one, like the Impressionists, or, different people who were like, oh, we're going to leave that all behind. But you still see how much that was included. They were still all formed in that way. And that was an important stage, for wherever art went. Yeah, that's an interesting analogy.
Yeah.
If you had to give an example using either a fictional person, Joe Schmo, or even just using, a real person's life, whether it's like a Mother Teresa or a Gandhi or someone, um, using the colors of spiral dynamics, what that looks like at each stage, because I think that's what sometimes, we get a little confused. I mean, same with anybody who's new to the Enneagram. You're like, wait, is that a 9 or is it a 6? And how do I tell the
Yeah. These people are
difference?
using all these numbers,
I
and what
know.
I'm not good at math, right? Or
Right.
colors, right? What are all these colors?
Right. Like, is this blue, teal, orange, yellow? I don't know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'll use myself, right? So
Sure.
I grew up in a traditional evangelical church, which was very blue, or sometimes called amber. There's actually two color sets, which makes it even more confusing with integral and spiral dynamics. Spiral dynamics, people are a little more familiar with, so we'll go with that. So blue is kind of that traditional stage.
Is that the first
some
one, or what
some
order do they go in?
That's not the first one, right? So some people equate it with sort of childhood growth and development. So the first stage is sort of this really base. I think it's beige, and it's just sort of, you're a newborn infant. Here you are, right? Undifferentiated reality. Gebser calls it the archaic, and actually that we won't go there to make it more confusing. But we have the beige, and then we start with a tribal. Gosh, I got to refresh on my spiral dynamics. I'm much more in the Gebserian world, but the traditional is probably one that we identify with a lot, because it's 35-40% of the U.S. or the Western. Well, more U.S., North America, and that is sort of the traditional understanding. Your average everyday church goer, strong value sets of, patriotism or religion, or this is, it's more of a collectivist space where so for me, it was growing up in that it's a very safe, healthy container, right? I'm given, here's the Bible, this is the source of truth and knowledge, and I learn that, and I have my community, and we're all very loving and connective, and also very insular and tribal, and right, you're either in or you're out, and there's boundaries, and that's kind of that blue stage, and it's also usually mixed with, for me, it was mixed with a lot of modern, which is the next one up, which is the orange, which is kind of scientific rationalism, right? Our education system in the US is very modern, very, you're learning the scientific method, you're studying according to Enlightenment rationalistic principles for the most part. So it's kind of this blend there. And then a lot of times people go off to, maybe they get in high school or go off to college, and they're learning about science, and it's questioning how we have faith, right? How do I grapple and reconcile these stages? And that can maybe be a source of deconstruction sometimes. Or sometimes it's the next stage of postmodernism or green, that you go from beyond this sort of modern mental, everything is efficient, and then it's like, no, we need to care about the earth, we need to care about the planet, we need to be more community minded, and be more kind of on perhaps the progressive spectrum is one way to consider it, politically at least. And that's the postmodern stage. I think when I was in the new monastic intentional community, that was very postmodern, very green, kind of this way of everything's egalitarian. We're gonna share everything in common. We're gonna, we have these inequalities in our society, and we need to go and be with the poor and save them, right? Or be this incarnational presence, and try to fix all of the wrongs of society, and so that's kind of those common stages of where a lot of our society is in spiral dynamics terms, or kind of Wilberian integral stages.
Yeah. So what's beyond that? Like, what are we called to beyond orange, blue, green?
Yeah, so spiral dynamics, or we'll talk about the second tier, right? We move into yellow, or a different framework, and I think, again, for me, it's been a real corrective to connect to different ways of thinking about that, because I don't think it comes through transcending, right? Oh, now I'm in this green postmodern space, and I'm seeing how it's fundamentalist. I'm seeing, another way that I'm just sort of boosting myself up, and well, okay, I guess I better put on my backpack and keep going and jump to the next stage, right? Well, okay, maybe a little bit, right? But I think it is more of this sense of seeking to integrate, and not fly on ahead, but to say, okay, what is the wholeness of my being? What is it within me that makes me who I am? Not just me, but us, right? Another way of conceiving of these structures or stages is that they kind of they become more inclusive and more at each sure stage, and so it unfolds into, it's not just me, now it's my tribe. Oh, it's not just my tribe, now it's my nation. It's not just my nation, it's the world. And then it's like, well, it's not just the world, but actually, is it the universe? Well, yes, but more in a way of it becoming embodied within and through me, in the becoming of the body of Christ, the interfusion of the divine and the material in the very fibers of my body, of our body, of the collective body of Christ. So it becomes a little more mystical, and that's why I want to kind of get away from the mapping of it and move more into the actual experiencing of that embodied consciousness, that mystical divine participation, which is really the work that we do at Integral Christian Network, because understanding and learning can only take us so far. We need to move into practice, as contemplatives know. But a lot of our traditional contemplative practices, well, they were designed for a specific purpose, and they serve specific ends, and some of them are really great, really wonderful. And also maybe there's other things that we need to integrate as well to have a holistic embodied practice that might be a little more relational, that might also be a little more into the spaces that maybe we're evolving into. So
Yeah, what does that look like?
yeah, so it in part is bringing more of the divine feminine into our practice. A lot of our contemplative practices were developed in, we might call them patriarchal settings, or in a monastic context that are a little more removed from life in the midst. And I remember I went to the living school at the Center for Action and Contemplation. That was a constant question, right? Okay, this contemplation thing is great, these 20 minutes. I've got a baby on my hip and I've got dinner on the stove, and I'm going to go sit down for 20 minutes, right? Okay. And silence and stillness, right? It's just, it's very good. It's very important. I spent many years in those practices. Were very helpful. But as we're encountering life now and the way of the world, and how we can be, there's definitely something to be said for stepping back and removing ourselves and becoming more transparent and clear. And I'm definitely not trying to straw man or pigeonhole contemplation. But there's also ways that we're learning through different studies about different ways of knowing, about centers of spiritual knowing in our body, about embracing relationality, embracing mystery, coming into more of our intuitive faculties, and not just doing the stripping away and the silence and the removal of those nasty pernicious thoughts, right, that we're trying to quiet and still. Again, that's a bit of a straw man, so I apologize for that. But there's other ways too that we can move into and embrace and practice with one another. I mentioned relational, that's a big one, right? To not just be in our silent interior spaces alone, surrounded by others, but to actively engage and participate in our shared interior spaces, to move into the collective field of spiritual presence and energy with one another in a more active, participatory way, is one element of that. And then also to move into those deeper ways of knowing and being, right? I mentioned the spiritual womb earlier. That's a real embrace of a more feminine quality of spiritual being, and creativity that comes from that, the life creation, becoming makers in the world, to be people who are transforming society, and our world needs it, right? Our world is going in one direction, and it's great to kind of clear our own consciousness and come into a better place of peace. But there's also a call to become, not just in our being, but in our becoming, divine presence in the world, making a new reality. So that's a little bit of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that something that you could share with us now? Is that like, I don't know, I mean, I know you shared that these are the kinds of things that you do in your We Space groups and being able to enter into that relational space of spiritual presence. And I'm curious if that's something that can be shared just by, a 5-minute practice, or what your thoughts are
Sure.
on that.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. So as we're encountering this now, and if people are watching, we're not actually in a relational space of direct presence, but we are, because in some sense it's timeless and it's
Mm.
spaceless. So maybe we've experienced that through the internet on Zoom, right? Well, I can feel present to you. I can connect with you in my heart in a way that I can feel energetically right now, Kelly, with you. Like
Mm.
we're sharing a We Space, and maybe someone who's listening starts to feel something in their heart. There's like this energy presence that comes, oh, okay, there's a reality here. There's something that's being co-created. There's a We Space, we call it, a field of energy, of love, of a way of connecting into the reality that's not just stopping at these boundaries of our skin. And so we
Mm.
can really do that in any time, in any place. And we do that primarily not through our mind, although we can go there. It's a little easier to access through the heart. But since we're not exactly in a relational context, let's do it through our feet.
Mm.
So our feet is our fourth center of knowing: our head, our heart, our womb, and our feet. And so if we just take a moment, actually don't like to say take, let's receive a moment of moving our awareness down to our feet. Maybe wiggle your toes, maybe feel the bottom of your feet against the floor. And it's crucial that we're not thinking about our feet from our head, but we're feeling from our feet.
Mm.
So really sense the bottom of your feet. It's okay if you're wearing shoes or if you're in a building, that doesn't really matter. If you can be barefoot in the grass, that's wonderful, but we can still connect to this reality. So feeling the bottom of your feet, perhaps just begin to sense your roots coming out from the bottom of your feet, connecting to the earth. This earth that we all share, this material reality, and we can ground to that earth through our feet, feeling our incarnated embodiment in this moment, in this time, in this place. And in that earth energy is Christ energy, the interfusion of the divine and the material that is flowing through your body and through the earth. And so too also your body and my body and our bodies. Maybe even you can feel the interconnectedness of your roots with others. Doesn't matter where we are. Kelly's in Oregon and I'm in Kansas City, and can feel perhaps an intermingling, or with others. That's probably enough for now.
Mm. Thank you.
So that's it's a practice, right? So just like any practice, we might be able to access it first time, or maybe we've done it before. Maybe we've done some grounding and other forms of practice, but intentionally moving our consciousness into that interconnected space, the more that we practice it, and practice it in a group setting, in a relational field where that collective we space is present and dynamic, the more easily we're able, because the presence of the group actually increases our capacity to sense that and to move into that. So it takes practice, but it's surprisingly accessible. That's one of the things about this sort of embodied, mystical way of consciousness that we're practicing into in our groups is that it's not something that takes 20 and 30 years of practice and maybe after that you'll have a mystical experience, right? Or maybe after that you'll transform your consciousness. No, we need the collective, because the collective has this transmission that brings us into a new reality so much faster than we would through years of practice. And also because we're moving into the embodied spaces, right? When we're trying to clear the mind with the mind. Well, that's another direction, but moving into the heart, moving into our feet and our embodiment, it's a much more imminent present reality that we can move into and access, and which brings about transformation in a more direct and accessible way, we found through experience.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I find so many people who are like, man, I just meditate so much better in a group. It's so hard for me to do it alone. And I had another conversation with Bonnie Badnock, who's an interpersonal neurobiologist. And so she was sharing, we basically talked about the neurobiology of presence, which was beautiful. But I mean, that was essentially the core of it, was from how our very bodies are made and our nervous systems are wired. We're made for co-regulation, And so that's, I mean, in spiritual language, that's what helps us be present, and why it's so much easier with other people. Because our very bodies and material that we're made of are wired to do that, like a tuning fork. If you're very present, that helps me be very present. If you're totally anxious, it's very easy for me to get pulled into that anxiety.
For sure. We know, I mean, you walk into a room, right? And you can feel kind of like, oh, there's something off here, right? Or, oh, this place isn't safe, or we have these really subtle perceptive intuitions, and we don't really give those credence in our society a lot of times, right? We just kind of dismiss them, or we haven't learned to develop those faculties, right? We don't take those courses in school, unfortunately.
I know, which I think is one of the reasons why I get so excited about all the developments in neurobiology and polyvagal theory and all of those things that help us understand from a scientific standpoint, which, given sometimes our Western left-brained whatever, just want to have that concrete knowledge, like, here's how that works, and here's why we're able to, why we space works, I mean, you can talk about it on some sort of like quantum or, whatever spiritual, ethereal level, but it's also really cool to see, like, but actually your body is made to do this. And here's
why. Well, it's like, well, it can sound a little woo woo or mystical, but then, the science is coming to support that more. I mean, Heart Math Institute is a really great organization that also has done a lot of research around that, around the field that our hearts create, and measuring the electromagnetic field actually can extend 8 feet out beyond our body, right? So we feel this when we're in a setting, but we've actually found it happens on Zoom too. It's not just physically bound, right? And we're getting little intimations of that from science and quantum reality. And the next step in the feet practice actually is to move into our incarnated entanglement. So there's these realities that are there that we're not usually conscious of, and there's these different sort of avenues and pathways that was saying, oh, actually we're a lot more interconnected than we think, or there's this reality of interbeing. Okay, so what does it look like to consciously seek to participate in those realities, to bring those into our spiritual practice, to say, okay, I'm gonna actually step into not just thinking about it or learning about it or reading about it, but practicing a felt sense of our incarnated entanglement with others in a we-space group. And that's something that we do. And it's really astounding how much you can actually get a felt sense of that. And it's important to have the science, to have these things that help open up our minds to accepting the possibility of these realities. But it's really the experience of it that will awaken it and enliven it in us to say, oh, okay, well, I knew that it was possible, or this might be the way things actually are. That this old scientific, materialistic, individualistic understanding of the way things are is not really complete, right? We know that, but we're so rooted in that from education and other things, right? So when we actually have that experience of it, especially in the relational field, that's what really awakens. And that's why we call it whole body mystical awakening, because we really are awakening to these other ways of knowing and being in our body, and in the shared body as well.
Yeah. It seems very parallel to what happens when people have some sort of divine encounter or mystical experience, that it's so different than just the pure head approach or what I think or believe and my faith and whatever language we use around that. But to have
Mhm.
something experiential that you have no explanation for.
Yeah.
And this here just sounds like that's happening, but on a relational level with others and entering into that connected space where it's like, wow, but we're
Yeah.
all experiencing this together.
Hmm. Yeah, and integral, they call those peak experiences. And I never quite know if it's PEEK, like I'm just getting a peak, or PEAK, right? I'm going to the peak. I think it's a little bit of both, right? But
Yeah.
but it's those experiences give us the glimpse, right, into that deeper reality, right, into that more mystical way of knowing and being. And I think they're way more common than we give them credit for, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think we've all had many mystical experiences, some of which we dismissed, some of which we just sort of shut off right when they were starting because we didn't know any better. Or other times we have had them and we move into them and God has met us in unique and incredible ways. And sometimes we hold those in our past like these great moments of divine presence. And we say, oh, that's when I knew God. And that's great. We need those anchors. One of my favorite quotes is from a Quaker mystic, Thomas Kelly, that says, continuously renewed immediacy, not receding memory of the divine touch, lies at the base of religious living. So I'll say that again. Continuously renewed immediacy, not receding memory of the divine touch, lies at the base of what he calls religious living. I would call it mystical living, because that word religious has some connotations for us. But that's what it is. It's like what practices can we seek to engage with one another that bring forth that continued immediacy, continuously renewed immediacy of the divine. And we experience the divine in what Integral calls the three faces of God. So it's the interior, the inner face of God, that embodying our inner divinity, the second person face of God, the intimate face of God, who is the God beside us, that we still have. Maybe it's Jesus with us, maybe not, because maybe we have some baggage there. I don't know. It could be another form of divine presence that's there with us, spiritual guides, or divine feminine, Sophia, right? Or then also the third face of God, the infinite face of God, the transcendent mystery that's always drawing us further and further beyond. So we seek to engage in each of those faces of God. And that's, again, hopefully a more holistic and integrated understanding of God that we can bring to our practice, coming through some of those previous ways of praying or thinking about God that we used to before that don't really fit or work anymore.
Yeah, I like that continually renewed immediacy. I mean, I think it's just a fresh way of looking at presence and
Yeah.
what it means to be present instead of just only holding on to those anchors of how God has been present in the past, but continually remembering like, but he is, she is, it is here now with
We
me.
are.
Exactly.
And we are, yeah. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, if people wanted to learn more either about We Spaces or about integral Christianity, where should they go?
Yeah, integralchristiannetwork.org. We have weekly writings that come out every Saturday that kind of explore different ways that this comes forth. There's a lot of complexity to learn about, right? But we always want to invite people into experience. And so those writings also help move us more into that embodied participation. And but the We Space groups are really the primary place where that happens, and they're free to join. Their groups come together of usually around 6 to 9 people to seek to participate in this way and do these mystical practices together, and it really is incredibly transformative. So our groups, we start new groups currently 3 times a year. It's a 4-month commitment to really have some time to learn, to get to know one another, and to engage in the practice with one another for 8 sessions, meet every other week. And it's really been powerfully transformative. There's a number of testimonials of different people who've engaged in them, and we've been doing them for for a couple years now, and learn a little bit more each time. It's always an evolving process. We want to be open to that evolutionary and integrative, right? We're going to learn more from people who participate in it, and all the things that they bring in their wisdom and their experience. So those information about that is also on our website, and integralchristiannetwork.org.
Beautiful. Well, is there any final word that you would like to share with our listeners today?
Let me tune into my spiritual womb, and I feel one of the deepest drivers. I don't like that word driver. Let me start again. One of the, I think, deepest parts of my being is, like I said, that continuously renewed immediacy, but also this desire to become. I spent a long time seeking my being and contrasting to doing. I was always more of a beer. And as I've come more into a sense of my being, I'm feeling this new arising of becoming, of how do I become into the world as divine presence? How do I live in that presence, in that flow, not just from my mind, because I couldn't do it with my mind, but how do I move into that in my body in a way that allows for me to be a channel of love that flows in every situation that I'm in, with my little kids who are adorable and also sometimes drive me crazy, or with my wife, or with my people I meet on the street, or wherever it is, right? To be that fully embodied divine presence, becoming in the world, but also not just individually, into a network of the body of Christ that's seeking to become transformation in a world that desperately needs it, and to connect in really powerful and transformative and new ways with others, in sort of this bigger global network of the body of Christ, that's not a belonging system anymore, but is a system of becoming and creating channels of evolution and growth and more life for the earth, for the regeneration of the earth and of one another and ourselves.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I very much sense the we space, the presence here now. So I appreciate being able to enter into that together.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for opening this space to move into.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining us today. And I encourage everyone listening to check out both We Spaces and a little bit about integral Christianity.
Wonderful.